The real issue today is not Democrats, not Republicans. It is government. Make no mistake about that. So an authoritarian that calls themselves a liberal is, in an extension, the government, right? By extension, they are the government. They want more government. Anyone that wants more government, and that doesn't just mean on the left. There are people on the far right that believe that we should do stop and frisk, policing in certain areas. Could that violate your constitutional rights? Is there anything that you can think of that would violate rights more so than literally stopping and frisking anyone for no particular reason other than you just want to make sure that they're not carrying anything that is illegal? To me, that's bonkers, and both of those are the problem. So what I'm really trying to say here is that the problem isn't in your political opposite so much so as it's in one specific group or way of thought, and that is government. Government is the issue. So an authoritarian leftist, which is the kind of the modern liberal, if you will, they are the problem because they want more government. And that also goes, as I mentioned, for the authoritarian right. The ones that are saying like, no, you should not be allowed to have interracial marriages. You should not be allowed to do this and that. Or stop and frisk. Like that, to me, is just as bad as the authoritarian leftist that wants you to force you to change the English language and things of that nature. So that, I believe, is the truth in this scenario. And I want to also, I want to discuss policing because it kind of coincides perfectly with what I just said about, what the problem is, right? The problem with the far left's version of policing, which is abolish the police, would mean, I'm not sure if you guys understand this, but there's a certain amount of evil out there. And not just the far left, by the way. The anarchist, stance on policing. The problem with that, to me, is that with that, there is a certain amount of evil in this world to where even if every single citizen was trained and armed, trained to operate a gun or whatever kind of a weapon and was armed at all times, there are people out there that are just so much more evil that, like, let's say you have a family of 10, all of you are armed like soldiers, right? They'll just send 20 or 30 people with bigger guns and they'll kill you if that's what they're looking to do. You know what I mean? Or if they'll conquer you, will take whatever it is that they want to take from you. They will get the better of that exchange because they're evil, sadly enough, in that particular kind of situation will prevail. So I think that some semblance of law enforcement is required. However, the right, the far right, as I mentioned earlier, is the whole stop and frisk right. That is ridiculous. And the Back the Blue movement in and of itself, mocking, in my opinion, the American flag, that is a problem. And the reason I say that's a problem is because you can't you can't sit there and tell me with a straight face that police today, in the vast majority of scenarios, that they are out there fighting crime. What they are doing, the vast majority of the time, is they're pulling over law-abiding, maybe minor traffic violating citizens. And they are wasting time out of their day, and they are, in many cases, violating their Fourth Amendment right to be secure in their persons and belongings. And so that, to me, is a gigantic issue. I just think it's such a blatant just taking of right. To me, it's just wrong. The founding fathers would absolutely be disgusted with police just pulling people over that are literally not bothering anyone, that are not even, breaking a real law, except for maybe like they didn't put their blinker on or something of that nature. That would drive our founding fathers crazy. Okay, so where does the solution lie? And in many cases, it lies in the middle. And in this case, I don't think that's much different, right? So what do you do? In my opinion, I would say we don't want to get rid of the law enforcement altogether, right? However, we need to improve them substantially. So what I would suggest is firing, in terms of police now, I'll talk about police first. I would suggest firing at least half of the police force. And the reason being is because of this. If you know any cops, you ask them, how many gunfight shootouts have you been in the last year or two? or even in their entire career. Because I would venture to guess that with the amount of police that we have right now, and remember, we pay the police out of our salary. With the amount of police we have, I would venture to guess the vast, vast, vast majority of them have either never been in a situation where they've been, at real threat of death, or have been in those situations, a handful of times, or maybe even at absolute most over a career a dozen times. Now, if you were to add up that policeman who's been in a dozen of those altercations, if you were to add up his interactions with a potential criminal or just a citizen that he's pulling over for no apparent reason, aside from like a blinker violation or whatever, if you were to add that up, it would be 0.00001% of the time, right? So I think that it's safe to say, and obviously my numbers are rough. They're estimations off the top of my head based on what I've seen in my 35 years of life. But the point is, the vast majority of cops are not fighting crime. They are harassing citizens. And that's an issue. And then in very rare cases, but very important, nonetheless, cases, they're shooting and killing innocent civilians or harming them in some way, even if it's just pepper spray or whatever, or even if it's just locking them in a cage for some ridiculous reason. Like I just saw something that was, there was a police officer in Florida that finally, thank God, was arrested, but he was like planting drugs in law-abiding citizens' cars when he pulled them over. He pulled them over for a bullshit reason. He'd plant something in there, even though he had a body cam footage that basically showed what he was doing. He felt so secure in that he was just planting shit in people's car and arresting them. And so many, many, many people got arrested for something that obviously that they had no guilt in. So my suggestion would be we need to fire half the police. We need to fire all the bottom half, right? At least. And we need to, and I wouldn't even be opposed to firing 2/3 of them. We need to fire anyone that's unfit for combat in terms of policing, like anybody that's really overweight, anybody that is incapable of anybody that's not emotionally intelligent. I think emotional intelligence should be prioritized. And we need to substantially increase the pay of the police officers that are left over from that. We need to require excellence as our standard from policing. We just have to, right? It has to be excellence. We have to have physically fit, highly trained. We need to increase the training tremendously. And I want like the most badass people possible training these police. Like I want ex-Marines or whatever the highest level of that kind of thing would be. I want those people training our policemen. And I want our policemen not interacting with traffic tickets unless it's an egregious one. I think that if they were to specifically focus solely on crime fighting only, right? Like, so for example, someone robs a 7-Eleven, the 7-Eleven store owner calls you and says, hey, somebody broke in here with a gun and took everything I have. He's in this car. Let's get in a high-speed chase and go get that guy, right? That's theft. That's a problem. Anything violent? Absolutely, right? Now, obviously, that's including sexual assaults and things of that nature. But let's try and eliminate crime in that regard rather than trying to extract extra dollars from the people that pay your salaries by charging them $300 for a speeding ticket or a no blinker ticket, or as I was just recently pulled over for literally an air freshener hanging in my car because he said it restricted my view. It was just your standard air freshener hanging from my rearview mirror. So I mean, shit like that is to me bonkers and should not be happening. So I don't know. I don't know how we would, I don't know if that's ever a realistic possibility, but I do believe that would be a very good start in, improving our police force. And I think that the FBI, even though they definitely have some corruption, a lot of it, maybe more than any other agency, except for maybe the CIA, I think they are necessary because they do meaningful investigations in terms of like trafficking rings or whatever it might be. Like real criminal organizations do get taken down by the FBI. So I think the only thing we could really do in the scenario of improving them is, well, maybe we could fire half of them too. I don't know how that works in terms of like what their usefulness is of each employee compared to the police. But I think that it would be a good idea to, to try and limit them in some capacity, or at least to try and rid the corruption in some capacity or whatever. But, I'm mainly focused on the police because, again, the interactions between me and an FBI agent are zero. The interactions between me and a cop on a yearly basis, at least 4 or 5 times, and it could be even more than that. And I might have to pay thousands of dollars worth of tickets in that time for shit that doesn't really affect anybody, and on top of paying their part of their salary with my tax dollars. So I think that's just bonkers, and really that would be my solution, at least to start on the cops. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree, and also if you're enjoying the content, subscribe, man, ring the bell, all that stuff, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace.